The experts that best communicate their culture and their vision to their potential clients are those entrepreneurs that we remember. I'm Shelby Jo Long with the Expertise Podcast, and here we explore the stories of those entrepreneurs to inspire you to think about how you can monetize your expertise. Hi, I'm Shelby Jo Long with the Expertise Podcast. I help experts create businesses out of their expertise by monetizing their intellectual property. And I like to use this podcast to be able to talk to entrepreneurs that have utilized their own expertise and created a business out of it using their own expertise to influence other people. I am very excited to continue the focus on the Strategic Advisor Board business today. And we'll talk more about the Strategic Advisor Board when we get later on the podcast. But to feature members of the Strategic Advisor Board that all have their own independent businesses that have developed from their expertise over the years. And I'm excited today to have an interview with Michael Sipe. And Michael Sipe and I are colleagues on the Strategic Advisor Board. That's how we met. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm excited to get into Michael's business and discover more about the story behind his business and also discover about how he uses that expertise to influence with his clients too. So Michael, welcome to the interview. I'm very excited that you're here today.
Hey, Shelby Jo, thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I could always talk about expertise. It's a good topic.
It's a great topic, and I don't think people think about how they can actually monetize their expertise and think about it in that way as a business. And it's important to keep that conversation going. So just to begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your personal and business background?
Sure. Well, I'm a business coach and consultant, and have been in that business for a few years now. My background is one of the military. I went to the U.S. Naval Academy. After that graduation from there, I went to flight school, became a Navy pilot. A little later, became an airline pilot. But along the way, as a military officer, we have the opportunity to be in leadership positions. And so as I grew older and saw ways of being a better leader, I started storing those ideas. And what I found was I really enjoyed being connected to the employees that worked for me, and also understanding what the customer needs were when we were providing a service. And my culminating piece in the Navy was I was the head director of a large headquarters office building that serviced thousands of people, had large contracts, things like that, had an executive dining service. And what I found was when I took interest in the people and what they did, the better their performance was. And so I became sort of an expert, for myself at least, on how did I need to motivate people to get the job done. And when I just saw a statistic the other day, I think there's something like, some 70 to 80% of the people are frustrated with their job, and they don't feel like their job means that much, or they don't find meaning in their job. And so for me, learning how to motivate people and help them feel like they're part of a culture where they're valued creates a very powerful dynamic, and people become energized and excited about being at work when they are valued and they do feel connected to the larger, bigger picture. So for me, the Navy side, kind of brought out that leadership piece. But after I got out of the Navy, a number of years ago, I got into the consulting space, specifically on technical things with regard to military new capability development. So if they needed a new widget, they needed a new missile, they needed a new software system, I became involved in not only testing those things, but also figuring out why they were needed and whether they would be effective or not. And so my background as a systems engineer provided an opportunity for me to see how everything integrated, either from beginning of development of an idea all the way to reaching it out to the marketplace and where the customer was, to be able to adapt that new technology or that new capability into their environment and make a change for the better. And so either from an engineering perspective or just from a workflow perspective, I became very in touch with things that worked well and how to integrate them, and when things didn't go well. And I think a lot of people know, but the innovation success rate isn't very high. In fact, it's more of like a failure rate. 85 to 90% of all new ideas fail to make it to the marketplace. So if you think about all the research and development, whether it's 3M, whether it's Boeing, whether it's all these large companies, or even small businesses, especially small businesses, that's a big tax on being able to bring a product to market. And when you have that kind of failure rate, it really does create a resource constraint. And so when one can find ways to help bridge those gaps where things start falling apart in the development cycle, that's something I really keyed in on and became an expert on how those things can break down and how to then instead be prepared for them and be able to integrate. And what it comes down to is kind of back to the leadership thing of it's the people. You have a marketing department, you have the engineers, or you have the scientists, or you have the sales team, or you have the website designers, all these components that go into the timeline of beginning of an idea all the way to getting it out to the marketplace. And then you have the customers. What do the customers think? How do they feel about it? Have they tested it before they've actually gotten it? You know, that kind of beta testing and evaluation is one of those sort of intangible things that is so dependent on the people in each segment to be able to be a champion for that idea. And if people don't feel valued or they don't feel like they're connected to the company, they're not going to put a lot of effort into making sure that that product is the product that should be successful. So for me, from my perspective, it's culture and then success in creating a environment where innovation becomes much more reliably successful. So that's kind of where my expertise lies is on the culture and how do you build that? And then how do you take a brand new idea and integrate it with the other systems, integrate it with the people, integrate it with the company or other companies if it's teaming with another company? How does that all work? And so that's where my background is, and that's what I love talking about all day.
Michael, you and I could talk for hours about this. Hours. I love organizational culture. I love all those pieces, and it's all systems theory, right? Like the second piece you talked about are all the systems. How do all the individual independent parts work together in an interdependent unit? You know, it's all that. And then the culture is kind of the umbrella over that is the human component of it. I think that's so interesting. And I'm really interested to explore that further. I also think it's interesting how you've kind of applied the culture piece on two different levels. And one is in the innovation, which I think is really a really interesting focused niche on what you do. And the other is in the leadership piece, and that they're not mutually exclusive, but they're they're super interesting applications of them. Can you talk about some of the work that you've done in the innovation space? I think that's a really, I want to hear about a story. I want to hear about a business you've worked with, or you don't have to name the business, but an example of that. I think that's really
cool. Sure. One of the things that I did was I was a senior consultant to what I would call the Department of Defense's strategic, but it was sort of it was a venture capital kind of small niche, but strategic impact kind of entity within the Department of Defense. And it was called the Strategic Capabilities Office. And it was specifically designed to help a region of the world where the US military operated and give them an advantage that they didn't have through traditional means. So we were looking at strategic ways to have a big impact. And it started out with like, how do you do things differently? And so one of the things we looked at was, hey, what if we had like these really, really tiny drones, these micro unmanned air vehicles? What could you do with them? And some people came up with, some engineers and some people kind of thinking outside the box came up with some interesting ideas. And we thought, well, that sounds like it might work. So what we did next was we put it through a lab environment, some software and some simulation to see if the effect that these drones might have would be what we thought they would. And so it seemed like they would, according to the lab results. But where I came in was thinking about, well, hey, where are we going to deploy these from? Where are we going to drop them from? How are we going to get them to where they can have that effect? Because in this particular instance, it was very localized where the drones would be flying. But to get to that point required a transit mechanism, meaning like it had to be in an airplane, or it had to be dropped from a balloon, or it had to be shot up into the air in the local area. So people hadn't really solved that part, other than they kind of came up with the idea, well, maybe an aircraft could drop it. So my point was, hey, that's great that we would have an aircraft, but think of all the other things that the people flying that aircraft are challenged with. So when we think about a customer space, and hey, I've got to go buy things at the store, I've got to go grocery shopping, and so at the end of the day, I'm only going to have so many dollars I can spend on other things that are maybe necessities. And those necessities are actually pretty important. I have to pay the mortgage, I have to pay the utility bills, all these other things. And so discretionary income becomes a little challenged if we have these things that are thrown onto us and we're trying to do the non-discretionary and the discretionary at the same time. So from a customer perspective, the people flying the airplanes had these regular requirements of, hey, we have to go and do these things, and you want us to go and drop these little drones out of our airplane. Well, that's going to be kind of hard for us to do. And so what I did is, my job was to figure out a way to make that so that it was compatible for the pilots flying the airplanes to drop the drones at the same time they could get in and actually be effective in the effective location for those drones. So what we did is we set up an experiment, and our experiment was to go to Alaska. There's a large military training complex there. And so we went and set up an experiment where it was a real world event where the pilots were flying in real world scenarios. And then we tried to integrate that in a way that would allow them to also drop the drones. And then we had some guys and gals on the ground that had designed the drones. They were from MIT, and their affiliate laboratory that had done the development of them. And what was cool about it was they had, it was sort of early on days of doing 3D printing. And so they did mass produced all these little drones within a few days because they were able to use 3D printing and really cool technology. But they threw it all together, and then they got it certified to be carried on the aircraft. And when they got out there, they were ready to go. They were pressing the envelope and got the development timeline to sync up with the actual event that we had planned. And a lot of things went great. They were able to deploy the drones. The drones did the thing that they were supposed to do, and we were able to actually measure to see that they would have the effectiveness that they did. And what was really unique about it was, yes, we got it all to work, and it was fun to see it work. But the bigger impact was showing that we could take a new technology and integrate that with an existing architecture, an existing system, an existing process, and do it in a way that wasn't going to impact them from being able to not do their normal job.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the times when we do innovation, we think, oh, this is a really cool idea, but then it doesn't complement very well with something else. And so it kind of falls flat. And so I think what it is really one of, hey, what does the customer really need? And if we can identify the technology that we're developing to meet that customer need in a big way, in the way that they actually need it, then there's a greater likelihood that as one develops that capability and then goes and tests it, that it's actually going to have the impact that they think it will have. And that's an example of something that we did out in the field that was really kind of fun because it was new technology with drones and coming out of aircraft and things like that, and doing it in the wild of Alaska, which was a really cool place. But I think the bigger part was the pilots coming back going, hey, I didn't think we were going to be able to do that. And the way you designed it into our normal everyday life made it so much easier. And then they became energized and enthusiastic about doing the tests and doing further on tests because they knew it wasn't going to impact them. And that's, I think, the key to it is getting buy-in, not only at the beginning, but then at the end when you're once doing the development and the testing and then evaluating it out in the field or out, in the real world, in the marketplace.
That's what a great story. There's so many things that stick out from that story for me. I was thinking the whole time, I really thought how interesting it was that everything was, that all those different parts had to be connected together for this one event to happen, this one test to happen. You have the researchers, you have the drone, you have all these pieces that have to come together. So that takes coordination, and the culture piece and the leadership piece to all pull it all together. I think that's really important. But then also, I really think everything you talk about is all about this discussion about innovation and connection to something that we know is familiar and something that the audience will resonate with and the audience will know. And I think that's I do a lot of work in branding and developing a brand, and what, you can have a unique brand, but you've got to connect it to something that the client knows about, or you've got to solve a problem that the potential client has, which is all about your brand. Who are you? What problem do you solve? And how do you do it? And everything you talk about just aligns with all of those things. I think that's so interesting. And I think it's also interesting because it's got such a good story. It's got, you've got the story and the success, and yes, there's the back and forth that you have to test, and you're not always going to win or whatever, but sometimes you will and sometimes you won't. I think that's such a interesting story. I like that. I also, and I don't know if it's time to switch to the strategic advisor board conversation, but just listening to that and, just to briefly introduce the strategic advisor board, we're a group of 10 experts, 10 professional CEOs that are all together on the same board, and we have to solve problems together. And I think it's a very unique space to be in, and it's an extremely unique and differentiated company. And I think that experience kind of leads into that. So just interesting, those connections.
Yeah, there is an interesting connection there. And I think the similarity is appropriate in the scenario I gave about the testing. Is when you talk about innovation, there's a book called Borrowing Brilliance by David Cord Murray, and he had been at Intuit, and they developed TurboTax. And basically every time that they wanted to roll something out, they built on an idea that already existed. And so the book was about, hey, when you're developing a new capability, you're going to borrow an idea or an existing brand or existing component that's already well known, but you're just going to add a little bit more to it that creates something unique about it that customers would want and need. And so when we talk about the Strategic Advisor Board and we talk about strategy for small businesses, one of the things that I think is really important for business owners to think about is the idea of, hey, I don't have to come up with a brand new strategy to make my company grow. I could take some of the existing things we have and do things we call the micro pivots, where we pivot just a little bit to get to the point where what we're offering customers and clients are things that are a little bit better or a lot better, but it's built off of something that we already have in place. And so you don't have to go and develop a brand new huge strategy that costs a lot of money. Instead, you can come in and make those micro adjustments to either the product or to the sales side or to the workforce that will create that big change down the road. And so I think that's a good tie in there to the Strategic Advisor Board and how you were talking about how we as experts kind of look for opportunities to help small businesses make those shifts. But it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a bunch of little things that will make the big change down the road.
Yeah, that's so many connections with that. But before we get to the Strategic Advisor Board, I just wanted to ask you to go back to your own business, because you had that great example. So tell me about the kind of businesses that you work with now in your consulting.
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about that. So one of the things that a lot of coaches, consultants use to when they come in and help with an organization, and I'm sure you've used a lot of them too, are things like the Gallup Strengths Finder Index. They'll use assessments like the Myers-Briggs Personality Type Indicator tests. And I came across an assessment and a coaching methodology that I found tremendously helpful. And the difference was that this was an assessment that was attitude based and it was time dependent rather than a personality that we have that we're sort of stuck or, kind of like most of the time in our lives and how we interact with other people. But the thing about this assessment that I came across was that there were different attitude levels that we'll have throughout the day, different energy levels. And so those energy levels reflect whether we're accepting the idea that maybe at the lowest level, we're a victim and we can't break out of the predicament that we're in. Like we're in a really tough competitive market and we're never going to get traction and gain market share against a competitor. Like that kind of victim mentality is a certain energy it brings to the workplace. And so if a CEO, business owner, department head, have that kind of mentality, it's a negative impact on leadership from a leadership perspective, because then the people below them are like, oh, well, if they feel bad, then I'm going to feel bad too. Likewise, if somebody has something where they feel like a little bit of compassion or collaboration kind of attitude, then their energy level is higher. And what we see when we look at the different energy levels or attitude levels, there is a correlation, a direct correlation between one's attitude, their energy, and performance, and whether the performance is individual or collective. And so when I, as a coach, come into an organization or come to an individual and work with them, we look at the energy that they bring to their environment. How do they show up each day? What happens when they have everyday kind of actions and environment? And what happens when they have a stressful environment? And how do they handle that stress? And the results of how the energy that they bring has a domino effect if they're in a leadership position. So the more that they're able to handle the stress and go, hey, that was a really bad luck, piece of luck we got there, but what can we learn from it? If they have that kind of attitude, then they go, okay, well, next time when this happens, this is what we're going to do. Not everybody has that kind of perspective. A lot of people, our egos get in the way and they go, oh man, I look really bad because of that, what just happened there. I'm going to blame the other guy, or I'm going to blame somebody else and not take responsibility for it. And all that does is shows to people beneath them that they're not really a good leader, that they aren't willing to accept responsibility. But if they take a different perspective and go, okay, I'm going to back the ego away and go objectively, how could we do a better job? How could we have been more prepared for that? What was the blessing that may have come out of it? And so there ends up being a little bit of a spiritual kind of component to that. And people all come from all walks of life, and they have different spiritual values. Some have none, but most people do. Like over 87% of the people have some sort of spiritual set of values. And that has a direct relationship to the attitude people bring to the workplace. And as leaders, it has an even bigger impact, because then it sets the tone and the work culture. And you and I could talk forever about that piece. But
Right.
from my coaching perspective, that's what I look at is what kind of attitude, what kind of energy do leaders bring? And there are proven ways through the programs that I use to help people bring up what we call their average resonance level, the average attitude level that they bring each day to the workplace, and how that they can improve and be a better leader because they are aware of what kind of mindset they have, how they project themselves, and then how they handle the stressors that they have in everyday life. And it makes a much bigger impact, I think, than taking some of the Myers-Briggs personality tests and figuring out, okay, well, can this person work with that person? Well, generally, but what about every day when we have these stressors that go up and down? Some days we have highs, some days we have lows, sometimes it's in between, it's a roller coaster during the day. And when we are able to objectively look at things and see that, hey, there's something bigger going on here. How can I integrate with that? How can I be a better leader, a better manager? And that's where my business is on the coaching and consulting side, is to integrate some of that systems innovation piece along with the energy side, the attitude side of being a better leader.
You work with primarily leadership teams then?
I do. I work with senior executives, managers, because to me, to make a difference in the world, my passion is creating a workforce environment where people feel valued and then can be energized and there's a study done that energized employees boost revenue 2 to 7 times for any company. These are Fortune 500 companies. These are small business sized companies. And so when the workforce is energized and they understand the value that they bring, then company profits go up. And so for me, I work at the top. I try to help leaders, managers set the environment, set the culture for that kind of dynamic growth and that kind of profitability.
That's great. Great focus, trickle down. A lot of it comes from the leaders, and they set the example of the culture. So I think that's really a good place.
Yeah, it sure is. And 9 times out of 10, it's always the ego that's kind of getting in the way.
That does not surprise me. I didn't mean for that to be the transition to the Strategic Advisor Board, but I do want to talk about that in this next piece of the interview. You and I were connected a few months ago with the Strategic Advisor Board, and we met all these amazing CEOs from all over the country. And we are in this decision-making think tank, which for me, that's kind of my dream. I love that kind of stuff. I love the dynamics of decision-making. I think it's a really exciting place to be in. I think the best decisions are made that way, in my own personal opinion. But can you talk a little bit about the Strategic Advisor Board and what you just talk about that and how it's connected to your what it is you do? So
Yeah, sure. So I think when you talked about the collaborative approach to coming up with decision making, one of the things that is really interesting about productive workforce cultures is the idea that there's a certain amount of freedom there, that there's a certain amount of democracy. Where it's not a command and control kind of leadership where they tell everybody what to do, but that it's a two-way or multi-way dialogue and exchange to come up with the best ideas, best solutions to the challenges that company may have. And that there's obviously there are a number of studies on this, but the fact remains that companies that are nimble, that are responsive, are ones that actually collaborate across all levels, top and down, left and right in the company. And so from the Strategic Advisor Board perspective, I like the idea of 10 of us coming together with different backgrounds, different expertise levels, and be able to say, hey, either I know personally because I've had the same problem that business has had, and here's how one could approach solving that problem. Or, hey, I hear you talking about an idea there, and I think that solution might be pretty good, but have you considered this other challenge we might be facing? For example, there's not enough resources to be able to supply all the product that we need to put out there. So how do we address that supply side challenge? When you're in an environment where people are open to not necessarily critique, but maybe a discussion about how could one do something better and what are the nuances, what are the challenges, what are the showstoppers that the three of us maybe might not be aware of, or the one of us might not be aware of. And so having a team come up with a solution that we kind of all agree on and we've all hashed out makes a much more powerful and dynamic solution that's much more reliable, because it's not just one person coming up with a solution, it's a bunch of people coming up with a solution. Mm-hmm. And it's an environment where people aren't afraid to share their ideas or concerns. And then that way, there's a much less likelihood for things to go wrong because we've all kind of hashed it out and thought it through from a different perspective and a different lens. And so from the Strategic Advisor Board perspective, as you and I both know, we've started meeting some of the other people, there is that we all come from different backgrounds. And those different backgrounds bring that different expertise, and that different expertise provides a different angle of looking at things and looking at things that maybe the normal person might not necessarily see if it was just getting one-on-one consulting. So that's what I love about this is being able to collaborate and come up with solutions with a great group of people.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's a really, it's such a great dynamic atmosphere already. And I think it's only going to grow. I think I'm just very excited for it. And I think the power of it is incredible. The amount of authority that's in that room and the amount of experience that's there. alone is something that's very, it's unmatched, I believe,
Mhm. Yeah.
with such a diverse background. The other thing that sticks out to me from what you just said too is that your background in leadership and being customer centric and consumer centric, it is the best way to find the best solutions and best strategies for the clients, because there's so many different perspectives. We're not just one approach, we're multiple approaches that come together to form that strategy. And I think that's a very unique part of the strategic advisor board.
It is unique. And at the end of the day, a business survival, their reliability on being able to survive the ups and downs is really dependent upon what can they provide their customers and how well do they do it. And I think, as you said, you can't overlook obviously the customer piece, but I think it's also a good place to start from.
Right.
Because so many people want to get into business because they, for example, have the best cupcakes there are that are out there, and that may be totally true. But how many people are going to buy those cupcakes? How many people would want those cupcakes? And it seems like common sense, but quite often I've seen so many business ideas come from the perspective of creating something and then going finding a business for it rather than seeing where the market might be and then finding a solution or finding a way to be creative. And being creative about finding a solution is actually the fun part. But that way we have a goal for what we're going for and they're developing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very fun place to be, and it's very exciting to be a part of, and it's going to be exciting to see where we go. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, Michael, to wrap up the interview, I just want to ask if you have created, from your experience and your expertise, you've created a business, and you are a published author about the same area. You have managed to create a business out of your expertise. And there are a lot of people out there that might be thinking, gosh, it'd be really cool to be able to do something that I love and that I'm passionate about, and this is a way I could do it. What would you say to the person that's thinking about monetizing their expertise in this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have to answer it with a sort of a caveat that the thing about me, and I don't know about you, but I like a lot of different things. Meaning, like, I have a passion for aviation. I have a passion for technology and new widgets, new gadgets. So, and I love interacting with people and learning their background. So when you look at all the different things that are out there, we can get sucked towards something that sounds like a really wonderful idea, and it is a wonderful idea. But when we're starting a business, a wonderful idea has to be backed by a passion. And that passion has to be a bigger passion than just that wonderful idea. And so when you think about a business, it's fun to get an idea going. It's fun to, get it established. But then maybe 2 years, 3 years into getting a business going, what's the next thing? Well, if it's another wonderful idea that has nothing to do with the business, then it's not part of a bigger passion. And so my comment would be, for me and for others, to really think about the longevity of a business. How long would one want to be in a business? And if so, is it a passionate idea, a passionate set of ideas that would be something that could last for that longevity? And quite often you talk about, CEOs, business owners burning out. Well, why did they burn out? Well, maybe they had that wonderful idea or a couple of wonderful ideas, but they ran their course and they were done. So my word of advice would be that think about what your bigger passion is, and that bigger passion, let that be the driver for your business.
Great piece of advice. It can only take you so far, so you have to have
Yeah.
that goal. That's so true. So true. Michael, this was a great conversation. Thank you for spending the time to let us know your story and about your business and how powerful it's going. What's the name of your book, by the way, so we can look it up?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's called Out of Dad's Box: How to Break Free from Parental Control and Transform Your Life at Any Age. And the long story short is my dad was a World War II, Great Depression era guy, very much focused on scarcity and lack because he came during the Great Depression in the middle. And his mindset was one that translated into how I was raised and then how I should act as for a career and what I should have as a job. But as I talked a little bit about earlier, I went down something that was kind of fun, kind of interesting, but it really wasn't my passion. And so the book talks about how does one align to their passion, whether it's they want to be a painter, whether they want to be a sculptor, whether they want to invent cars, new technology, whether they want to be a pilot, all those different things that they could really have a passion for life, how to break free from that parental limiting mindset and go for something that they would really like to do.
I'm going to read it. Sounds
Okay.
great. I'm excited. How do we really, and everything you just talked about when you answered that last question, I think resonates with all those ideas. So, which all has to do with passion and leadership and all of that. So
Great.
I'm very excited to explore that more. And it was wonderful to get to know your story and a little bit more about you. And I look forward to our future interaction on the Strategic Advisor Board and beyond. So thank you again for coming to the interview. Thank you, everybody, for listening and to the Expertise Podcast, which is featuring the Strategic Advisor Board. I look forward to you listening next time when we have 5 more interviews with the Strategic Advisor Board. I'm one of them, and Michael's going to conduct that interview next. So we will hope to see you next time to think about how to transform your expertise into a product. See you next time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Expertise Podcast and hope you're inspired to think about how to further monetize the expertise and the processes that you have in your own business. See you next time.